Hello, welcome to Indie Tutorials. My name is Guillermo and I would like to thank the patrons supporting this channel. Okay, so I have installed Cinemachine. So now we need to do is go back to our battle arena scene, and from here we have the third-person camera from InVector. So what we want to do now is right click on it, go to prefab and unpack prefab. So we no longer want to affect the main prefab that we use for all other scenes and just have this one as a dedicated let's say battle camera. We only have one scene that handles all the battles. We are going to be changing dynamically the environment. So in this case, for example, I have this geometry. So if we were in another zone from the game, let's say Luxirion or no other place from Juznan, then we could just dynamically load that geometry. That's the plan by having one single battle scene. But anyways, so we already unpacked the prefab. So the next step we want to do is right click here in the hierarchy, go to Cinemachine and click on Target Group Camera. Okay, this will create two objects, Target Group, the virtual camera, and it will add the brain Cinemachine component to the game object that has a camera component on it. Okay, so let's click on Target Group. Probably you will want to rename this to have a better identification. So let's say Target Group Camera. So from the properties that we see here, we can set the position to 0 on all the axes. Then here in the component itself, Cinemachine Target Group, leave the position mode to group center, leave the rotation mode to manual. We can keep late update, and for the sake of setting up a little bit here in the scene, we could drag the prefabs from the player and the enemy. So let's go to resources. Let's say, for example, the garb, we have lining. Let me check the spawn point rotation, and the position is -3. So yes, it is okay. I could copy the transform, copy copy component, select the prefab from lining and paste component values. So we know the battle will start, or the position of the player will start here, and the enemy, it will start 5 meters away from the starting point. So we can select now in the prefabs enemies, we have the chomper battle. So let's drag it into the scene as well. Switch the position to 0, Y to 0, and the Z to 5. We can change the rotation to look at lining. So if we select here side mode, so this is what it looks like. So select again back the target group camera. Let's add 2 entries, one for lining and the other for the enemy. Okay. After that, what we want to do is select the weight. We are going to be handle this dynamically, of course, because we don't have in the scene already the targets. So this is handled by the battle system itself. But for give you just a way to have the feeling how it will look. So the radius is how much the size will be taken account in order to get the average bounding between the targets. So let's say 0.5 or 1.5. Okay, for each one, you can start seeing that we are taking having a change in the scene, in the game view. So now we have already set up the target group. We can go into the virtual camera. Again, let's just rename this to something more meaningful. Cinemachine Virtual. And this Cinemachine virtual camera is already set to follow and look at the target, whatever we have in the target group. And there is a bunch of properties that we can start playing with, but the most important are, for example, here the body, which is set to transposer, and the follow offset. So from here we can say that we want to follow, let's put something like 4, and for the set we can leave it to -10. Then in the aim group composer, so this is what it looks like. Remember, we are giving the lining player a little bit more weight than the enemy, so the camera will always get the average from lining, which is the main character, of course. So in the aim section here in the virtual camera, what you can start playing is with the adjustment mode and probably the framing mode. Let's say, for example, horizontal or vertical. Is up to you to play with these values. Then for the adjustment mode, which is going to be how the camera adjusts between the two targets to be aligned, we have by default zoom only, but you could play, for example, setting to dolly then zoom. Alright, and afterwards, of course, we have here the maximum distance the camera can get away from the targets, and that's something that needs to be tweaked a little bit, since we have in this case we have a scenery with some walls or some buildings in the background. We don't want the camera to clip through those, but yeah, we will see after we start playing around with these things. So let's see, let's save our changes, but before that we need to go back to the target group camera and let's remove both objects. They will be added on runtime dynamically. Let's remove the prefabs from the scene and leave it clean. Alright, before leaving the scene I will create a new game object and I will call it BattleManager, and I will create now a script that will handle or will be doing like a bridge between the battle itself and adding and removing targets from the target group camera. Okay, so let's do that. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is create an empty game object, and let's call it Battle Manager, and this will be working as a bridge between the battle components and ORK and the target group camera, among other things in the future. But for now, let's create the game object, and now let's go to our folder scripts. So scripts, battle system, and create a new C# script. Let's call it Battle Manager. Let Unity compile the script, select the game object and assign the script again, and double click on it to edit the script. So we want to add a using statement for ORK Framework, and also we want to hold a reference to our Cinemachine Target Group. So let's create a serialized field, private Cinemachine Target Group, and let's call it Cinemachine Target. We want to add the start event from mono behavior, and in here we are going to register to ORK battle event. So whenever the battle starts, we are going to be notified. When an enemy is killed, we get a notification about it. And also we want to register and track the internal tick or update method of the battles. So for that, let's do a ORK battle started. Let's click plus equals and then tab to get an automatic method for it. Let's do ORK battle tick plus equals tab, and lastly ORK battle enemy kill plus equals tab. Now let's remove the not implemented exceptions from all the three methods. Okay. So before we forget, at the same time we are registering to the events, we want to unregister of them. So let's just copy the three declarations here, and let's add an onDestroy method and paste this declaration, but change the plus equals to minus equals. This is just to avoid memory leaks. There we go. Okay, so let's move the battle start on top, and here what we want to do is to retrieve the active group leader as always and assign it to the target Cinemachine target. So let's click on the Cinemachine target here and say Cinemachine target dot add member, and it's expecting a transform. So let's select ORK game active group leader game object transform. Then it's asking us to put the weight that we saw in the inspector. In this case it will be 1.1 float, and lastly the radius. So let's select 1.5 float. Okay. I don't want to right away add an enemy here, because if you remember from the previous video, the auto target only works when we activate an ability. So it will be a little bit of confusing adding a random enemy in the battle, and out of the sudden when we activate the ability is targeting another enemy that is not the right one, or the one that we selected using the get nearest. I already posted a question in the forum for the creator to see how we can handle this situation, but for the time being let's just add the player member to the Cinemachine target. Then of course in the battle tick, which is like the update method, we are going to do the logic similar that we did in the player controller. in the third person character controller, sorry, from in vectors. So here in the battle tick, the first thing I want to do is just make sure that we are still running the battle. So battle is battle running. If the battle is still running, of course, then we want to select or check if the leader has targets. So again, this, let's copy here this section up to leader. So let's say if targets leader, we retrieve the battle component from the leader, last targets count greater than 0, and also we want to check that the current targets added to the Cinemachine target group is equal to 1. We don't want to add more than 2 targets at the same time. So we check here Cinemachine target, and it has a target array. So since this is an array, we can check the length is equal 1. So at least we should have the player here lining in this case. Then what we want to do is select the combatant, let's call it enemy again, that are inside the target. So at index 0. Okay. Of course, we do a health check. We're checking if the enemy, this is the enemy combatant component, is not null. And also it could be that we have a combatant component, but the game object is null. So we also check that. If that's the case, then we return from the tick method. If we are good to, if we have the component and a game object, then we can add. So let's copy this line here, paste it here, and then we add a member. In this case, it will be the enemy. So the enemy, game object, the transfer of the enemy, and in this case we want the weight to be 1.0 or 1F. There we go. Lastly, when an enemy is killed, we want to remove the target from the Cinemachine Target Group list. So let's select Cinemachine Target. Let's do a health check again about the combatant. If combatant game object is not null, then we, in this case, remove member combatant game object transform. Alright, so let's go back to Unity, let it compile. And from here we have the battle manager, we have our property here in the inspector. So let's drag the target group camera on it. And you might wonder, okay, ORK Framework is going to, whenever we want to block the camera, is going to disable this script, right? The third person camera. This is set in the ORK Framework editor. Right at the beginning of the series. So let me just collapse a little bit. So we have here in base control, game controls. If we scroll down, we have custom control for the camera. Is going to disable the V third person camera component whenever we wanted to block user camera movement by the user. So how to handle this, that we are now having this Cinemachine brain here? Well, that's simple. We want to go back and revisit the third person script. So let's edit script, and we have it here. So what we want to do is to add a couple of events. We know that ORK will disable this script when it needs to be blocked. So let's add on disable and on enable. Okay, and from here what we can do is check if in the game object this script is residing. We have a Cinemachine brain component. So we could do something like if get component Cinemachine brain is not equals null, then we disable the component. Enable set to false. Of course, this is not nice because ideally we want to cache this component in the start event, for example. But the main camera outside the battle scene, it won't have a Cinemachine component into it. But it's up to you. But for the sake of doing it quick now, just do that, and afterwards we could cache the component properly. So in this case, when we enable again this script, and we enable again the Cinemachine brain component, and that we handle the issue about blocking the camera by ORK Framework. Okay. Before leaving this script, I will also, here in the start method, last time I forgot that we need to also check this rule about if we are in battle or not. Otherwise, when the script is started, it will call this init method, and it will run all this stuff here that we don't want during battles. So let's do here if ORK Framework battle is running, then do the opposite. If not, is battle running, then we execute this one. We can leave it as is, but I like to be more explicit for readability purposes. So let's do like so. Save the script and let's continue. Okay. So one thing to mention before I forget is that as you remember, the target group is expecting a transform. So in our case, the player prefab that is going to be instantiated as a combat is not the garb, is the schemata. So if we were to check here the prefab res schemata battle and open the prefab, you'll see that of course we don't have any visuals, but if we were to select the capsule, for example, we need to be careful about that. The target group will be looking at probably the root of the game object, and we don't want that. If that is your case from your character that you are using, try to add like a dummy transform like this one, head follow, and instead in the script for the target group we want to set this transform, not the root transform. Okay, so just bear in mind that we might need to do it as well, head follow in this case. Okay, so let's let's go out here, and I think we are good to test. So let's go back now to the staging scene. Let's save our changes, of course, and let's okay, so let's give it a try. Ctrl P. And let's find jumper. Okay, so here in the hierarchy we have the third person, Cinemachine brain. If we were to press the pause button, you can see now both the third person camera script and the Cinemachine are disabled. So let's resume. Then we can check that in the target group camera we have only one combatant or one target. This is the one expected. And for the position, I can tell that is looking at the root, not the head. But again, let's tick on the camera virtual and let's check the body. And from here, we could play a little bit. Probably not now in runtime. Yeah, but I think this was okay from the beginning. And the reason that we set the rotation mode to manual is because later on we also want to implement from the right thumbstick way to rotate or orbit the targets, not just in this case lining, but the targets. So let's see if we get near one of these jumpers enemies, and if we click the ability, it's not been added manually, automatically. We are going to debug that, but for the time being, let's add here, let's say, I guess this one. So now the camera is considering both lining and the enemy. Now we kill it and it was removed from the list, but I can see it's not been added when we activate the ability. Okay, so let's debug it. Okay, so I went debugging and the issue was simple to detect. It was a mistake I made here in this check in the BattleManager. We are checking whether if the enemy, we are saying that if the enemy is not null or the game object is not null, then we skip and we don't add it. So this is wrong. So we need to check if the enemy is null or the game object from the enemy is null as well. Then we skip the method. Otherwise, we add it to the Cinemachine target list. So let's save. Let's Unity compile, and let's give it a try. Okay, so let's check the component. If I apply thunder, there we go. Jumper is added to the target groups. And if we start moving lining, this target enemy remains on site. Now let's kill it. We're back to 1 in the list. If we start attacking the second one, it's been added to the list, and now we can track it. So let's see how far we can go without the camera clipping. Nice. Okay guys, well, see you in the next video, and we are continuing improving the battle system, how the battle starts, the way the chomper is being killed. I don't like that it just disappears, so we are going to add a nice animation and a dissolve effect. So keep tuning the channel, and thank you for watching. Bye bye.